And welcome back to the Texas Longhorn Football Channel. I am your host, Anwar Richardson, solo today, but that's all right. Still going to have a great show. So do me a favor. Before we get started, I think you guys kind of okay with me. The majority of you guys, I think, are cool, okay with me, kind of like me. It's not Junk Unk, just Anwar today. Junk Unk's still on a Wednesday night. So before we get started, hit like, hit subscribe. If you haven't subscribed to it, subscribe. Why you got to subscribe? Subscribe is just so you get all the notifications about when videos are posted, live shows start. So, it comes to you right away. It comes to your email. So, that's the only reason why I subscribe. And it probably helps with some sort of crazy metrics that an old man like me has no clue what it is. But the young kids say it. If it's good for Ryan's toy review, it should be good enough for us, right? So hit like, hit subscribe. I totally appreciate all the love and support. And today, we are going to be talking about the Texas defense, and more specifically, we're going to get into the subject of Pete Kwiatkowski because that seems to be the theme of the week. Seems to be the theme of what everyone wants to talk about. It's out there. We're talking about the defense. We're talking about what happened after that 37-34 disappointing loss versus Texas Tech. Sure, there's other topics out there that people have talked about. Of course, people storming the fields and being upset about that, fights afterwards, never going back to Lubbock, like all kinds of stuff. I get that. But there's also another important thing that we have to discuss, which is this defense. So let's get into it. Sit back and relax, enjoy the ride. Let's have a good conversation about this. And by the way, put your thoughts in the comment section as well, because as I'm talking to you, I want to be able to go back and read what you guys say. If you agree, disagree, and maybe there's some points that I didn't think about that you can go ahead, because there's a lot of times, I mean, you guys are really smart people. So there's a lot of times that you might have said something. I'll go, oh man, I wish I had thought about that too. Or I'll write down a note. So go ahead and give me your feedback as well, because I want to hear what you guys have to say also. So thank you so much for that in advance. Let's talk about this defense. And let's really start in the offseason. Let's go back before we even got here to Texas Tech. We were coming off a season where this defense clearly was bad in every single way, right? 100th ranked defense, couldn't stop anybody. It looked bad. And so what does Steve Sarkisian kind of do as the thing as far as like, okay, I'm not going to make a coaching change. And a lot of coaches don't want to make a coaching change after year one. Like that's hitting the panic button really upon the onset. Even though maybe it could have been justified, but you want to feel like, okay, I'm going to give this thing some time. You start thinking about the things that you could do differently. And one of the things Steve Sarkisian started thinking about the things he could do differently was two things. One, he was going to hire someone to help out on defense. And then two, he was going to get more involved. Let's start with the one. The first thing he wanted to do was hire someone to help out on defense. And that person ended up being Gary Patterson. Kind of fallen from the sky, but one of the greatest college football coaches in the history of this great state of Texas. He puts Gary Patterson on his staff as an analyst. And that is supposed to hopefully help out this defense and help to fine tune it, because Gary is a defensive minded guy. Gary at TCU, this is what he did. We know what Gary is able to do at TCU as far as not only developing NFL talent, but developing good college talent, and then being able to figure out how to attack from all with these stunts. Remember all the stunts that GP would do? Like, it was good. It was innovative. It was creative. Like, everything about it. And so you bring that to your staff and you say, okay, this is going to be the guy that sits in on meetings. This is going to be the guy that gives his input. This is going to be the guy that can hopefully help us develop a game plan. Like, that was Gary Patterson's role. And you think to yourself, okay, that's a solid addition. But there's also another thing, a part of that was, okay, within that, there was always going to be this little thing that's created when you bring a guy like Gary Patterson in, when you bring a guy with that kind of resume, when you bring a guy with all those accolades, when you again, as I point out, when you bring in one of the greatest coaches in the history of this state of Texas, by the way, the great state of Texas. Can we say that again? The great state of Texas. You set yourself up. And what Steve Sarkisian kind of set himself up with was being in a situation where if the defense plays well, Gary Patterson is going to get a lot of the credit. And if the defense doesn't play well, Pete Kwiatkowski, was going to get a lot of the blame. And that's kind of where we've been in a little bit of the season, right? Because this defense played well against Alabama. And the person who was receiving a lot of the credit was Gary Patterson, to the point where Gary Patterson had to tweet out something because I think he felt some type of way, because Gary Patterson is a very respectful man. Like, he's an OG. He understands what it feels like to be a coach on the staff, an assistant coach on the staff, and he never wanted to be a threat. Like, that's the one thing you got to respect about a guy like Gary Patterson. He respects the levels to this thing, and he respects the game. So Gary Patterson didn't want to be the guy that took any of the credit. And he made sure hey, this is a group effort. This is not just a me thing, it's an everybody thing. Got to respect the man. But then what the other portion of it was going to be, if things don't go well, Pete K is going to get the blame. And that's where we are after Texas Tech. Poor Pete K. I feel for the guy to a certain degree, because he's like, well, damn, I get nothing. And we talked about this. We talked about this in the offseason. I remember having shows with Jeff Ketchum, having my individual shows, and we talked about, like, to a certain degree, it might end up being a lose-lose for Pete K. Like, it just might end up being that situation when you bring in that kind of guy, and that's where we're at. Here's the second thing that was going to happen, though. Steve Sarkisian started saying, like, he was going to be more involved within the defense. He started talking about it at the end of last season, how he was going to be involved a little bit more this season, a lot more this season, right? And he started talking about he's going to be more involved in meetings, which he said he was. He started talking about being more involved in the game planning, which he said he was. And so one of the things that I remember, I asked Steve Sarkisian about this during the season, and he talked about how he's going to be more engaged. So here's the quote. When I asked him a direct question about this, and Sarkisian started talking about his involvement, here's what he says. He goes, I try to be more engaged in defensive meetings. Not to slide it from an offensive perspective, we adjusted a little bit of our schedule. For example, this is during training camp. He goes, for example, this morning, the defense lifted first, and then the offense met. Then the defense came and met, and then the offense went and lifted. That gave me an opportunity to go see both sides of the ball's meetings, to be in there for the unit meetings, and then go to specific position groups. I want more of a presence. He says, I spoke to the defense recently. I want them to feel my presence in the style of play that I would like for us to play defensively. I think that they need to hear that from me, along with PK, along with Jeff Choate, along with Terry Joseph, along with Bo Davis, Blake Gideon, and that whole crew. But I can't just say to the staff, I need to be more involved with these guys and be able to coach them where we're on the field as well. So Sarkisian put it out there that not only that, yes, he's got Gary Patterson, but now he's going to be more involved in the defense. Those are going to be the two fixes that were going to happen. So before you start pointing the finger at one guy, there's a collective things that were occurring that were supposed to make this defense a lot better. And so let's look at what happened versus Tech. Let's branch out after that. And I know you guys, Tech's fresh on the mind, right? Fresh on everyone's mind. And so let's go through the numbers of it, okay? And then we'll talk about a little schematic thing, and then we'll also talk big picture, okay? So let's go through the numbers. What Tech was able to do from an offensive standpoint was fascinating and frustrating, and brings us to the conversation of, is Pete K doing enough? Because we're talking about an offense, the Tech offense, by the way, that was giving away turnovers like Halloween candy prior to Saturday. I mean, that quarterback was just, hey, you want it, you can take it. Anybody want it. He had 5 turnovers entering that game in about 2.5 quarters. And he had 2 other times where he nearly fumbled, and he did fumble, but the offense recovered. He potentially had 7 turnovers entering that game. He only put the ball on the ground once, and the Texas wasn't able to recover that. In this game, Texas Tech recorded 31 first downs, in addition to the 100 plays, right? But 31 first downs, right? They compiled 479 yards of offense, but the fascinating part about that, it was like 8.7 yards per pass completion. So it wasn't like they were going ham, right? It wasn't like it was an air assault and air raid and anything to that effect. There was a lot of little things underneath. We'll get to that in a second. Third downs. 7 of 20. Fourth down, that's the big thing we've been focusing on, 6 of 8. In red zone conversions, 6 of 7. Bottom line, not good enough. Bottom line, not good enough. There's definitely many components to that, but bottom line, that's just not going to cut it. Period. Of where we're at. And one of the frustrating parts of watching that game, hearing from you guys, getting feedback from you, is not seeing that center of the field kind of closed up, not seeing the adjustments that you would want to see that from a defensive standpoint. But again, they weren't going air assault. It was just a lot of smaller things and not having guys in position, playing off of receivers so far off. That seemed to be a frustrating thing there. Having guys play so far off, especially on third and long. You're having your guys like 12 yards back, and people are like, why are you playing off these guys? And then having to, try to rebound at that point. That was a frustrating thing, I think, for a lot of Longhorn fans who have to watch that. And no, at the end of the day, you say to yourself, that's just not good enough. And look, at the end of the day, too, when we start thinking about what Joey McGuire did on those fourth downs, listen, you played sports, right? I'm sure a lot of you guys have played sports, whether you played in high school, college, professionally, or just recreationally, or if you just got a competitive drive within you, right? Whatever that case may be, when someone is going for it on fourth down 8 times, they're basically saying, you ain't got no heart to stop us. They're basically saying, I'm going to keep punching you because I know you're going to fold. That's what Joey McGuire said after the game, right? He said that. Now, look, I don't 100% co-sign with what Coach McGuire was saying, but I get his overall point because I don't necessarily think that Texas folded, but they did battle back. Within those last couple of seconds, Hudson Card had an amazing drive to be able to send that thing into overtime. So I wouldn't say this team 100% folded, but did they keep punching and punching? And when they were down by 31-17, where it could have gotten away from them, did they battle back? Did we see kind of the same story that we've been seeing throughout this duration of watching this, over the last 2 years, which is that Texas has a lead at some point in the second half, double digits. It doesn't find a way to seal the game and to send it home. Like, we did see that. And we saw this from this defense. And that portion of it, when I go back to it, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. That's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it overall because, yes, we'll get to the Alabama game. The Alabama game was great. That was a great defensive moment. But was it a movement? That's the question. There's a difference between having a moment and a movement. And what we're looking at when we go back to that Alabama game, we're looking at a moment in time where this Texas defense rose up, a moment in time where we felt like they had game plan for them perfectly schematically, a moment in time where you said to yourself, this defense has arrived. But a couple of games later, we realized that was just a moment. It was a singular thing and not the movement that you wanted to have, that you expected to have, to be able to build on, to continue going. That's the problem where we're at. And that's where you start to say to yourself, it's not good enough. Because here's the thing about being able to plan for a team like Alabama. Now, look, what I'm about to say is it's easier said than done. You must give Texas credit for what they were able to do, whether it's from a coaching standpoint, whether it's from the player standpoint. I will not be insulting and try to take away what happened versus Alabama. It was great. One of the better defensive performances we have seen in a long time. The thing about scheming for Alabama, remember what Steve Sarkisian said, and I think I had asked him about this right before the game. I want to say it was like a week or so before the game, and he said that the game plan had been done months ago. See, the thing is, you can scheme for a team like Alabama in week 2, that you're going to face them in week 2, because for the most part, Alabama's not going to change what they do. Alabama's going to be Alabama. Alabama's going to run their things. You know exactly what to expect from Alabama. Alabama wasn't going to come out there and run a wishbone, right? Alabama wasn't going to come out there and do something crazy that they have never done before. Alabama's going to do what Alabama does. And all you had to do at that point is just get your guys prepared for everything that you know Alabama's going to do and just be in the right positions for it. That's what you had to prepare for. The harder part became where you didn't have months. You had months to prepare for Alabama, but didn't have months to prepare for a Texas Tech. And so there lies like the difference. When I say the difference between that and the movement in a moment, that becomes one of the big differences. And so let's go outside of this for a little bit. Okay, so we talked about the Tech game and the things that happened there. And by the way, guys, I know there's still some season left. So I'm not going to just sit here and act like the season's over with or death, doom, and destruction. Like nothing to that effect, okay? But we're talking about where we are right here, right now. Hell, I hope a couple of weeks from now, we're doing a show, or I'm doing a show. We're all doing shows on the Texas Longhorn Football Channel, which, by the way, hit like and subscribe, where we're talking about how this defense turned around. I would love to have that conversation. Love to have the conversation about how the defense shuts down West Virginia this upcoming weekend. How does defense shuts down OU, that weekend, how the following weekend, and that weekend after that, and the weekend after that. Like, I would love for us to be talking about that. But here's where we're at right now. When we look at the Big 12, and I'm just looking at the Big 12 right now. I'm not even going to go too far out, but let's just talk about where the Big 12 is, okay? When we look at where Texas is ranked in total defense, they are ranked 9th out of 10 teams, giving up 380 yards per game. That's not good enough. Now, ironically, they're ahead of Kansas, which is giving up 402.5. So that ain't good enough. But somehow, some way, they're finding ways to win when it really counts. But Texas is 9th in total defense. That's not good enough. When it comes to sacks, getting to the quarterback, something that we talked a lot about last year, and then we talked about this season, and everyone felt like this was all these things were going to be so much more different this season. They are tied for 7th in sacks, and that they're tied with K-State with 4. It's not good enough. Just isn't. Gets a little bit depressing here. One of the stats I wrote down: opponent third down conversions. 8th in the Big 12. 8th in the Big 12. 40%. 40% of the time. 4 out of 10 times, a team is going to convert on third down against Texas. That's 8th in the conference. To give you just kind of a counter of where that is and where that ranks, Oklahoma State is first with 23%. 23% the times opponents are converting on them on third downs. Texas at 40%. Talk about not good enough. And then, from a fourth down conversions, it's clearly Joey McGuire throws all that out of whack. 7th, 54%, over 50% of the times. And we know about 6 of 8, 50% of the times. 7 of 13 have been converted a fourth down. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. 7th in turnover margin, but here is another one that's worth going into. 9th in turnovers with 2. 9th in turnovers with 2. Okay. How about in opponent long scoring plays? Almost done. We're not going to depress you too long. Almost done. 9th in opponent long scoring plays. They had Texas, the only team in the Big 12 that's given up a play over 80 yards, 80 plus yards. Texas is the only team. Texas is one of 2 teams that have given up a play for 70 plus yards. The other team would be Oklahoma State. Texas also, so within that, Texas also given up a 60 yards, 60 plus, 50 plus, you name it, then it goes a little bit lower. But from low to high, 9th in long scoring plays, 6th in scoring defense. So when we start thinking about where this team is ranked nationally, defensively right now, 75th in the nation. That's not going to cut it. And then in the conference, like I told you, they were 9th right now in total defense. You know where they were last season, how they finished last season? 8th. So right now it's taking a step back. It's not good enough. Just not. Um, Now, look, with the subject of Pete K, right, and what that it entails as relates to him. Now, look, there is some player responsibility here. Okay, so it's not just 100% pile on him. There's some player responsibility here. Okay, you've got to be able to get, a look. Not to single him out, so I won't single him per se, but so I won't mention his name. But listen, at the end of the day, when you got an opportunity to put Bryce Young down to the ground, you got to do it. It doesn't mean it just came down to one play. Of course, there was a lot of plays that happened before that. We all understand that. It's not to blame the young man for it not occurring. Like, I'm not going to do that at all, because overall he's been pretty solid and overall he's played well. So it's not to say that's that thing. But when we talk about, okay, well, Pete K needs to do certain things, then we got to look at players. Players got to execute as well. So when you have that opportunity, what does it look like if you bring him down to the ground as opposed to missing the tackle, and then he breaks that run and is able to seal the deal from there? When it's third and forever, you can't commit penalties. You can't. I can't blame Pete K for that. I can't be for past interferences and things to that effect. I can't blame him for guys jumping off sides. Like, there's also a component that you got to put on those guys, that they have to be able to execute. Now, look, does he have to be able to put them in the right positions and situations to execute? Absolutely. There's defense adjustments that have to be made. But there's also players that have to win 50-50 balls when they're put up in the air, right? Like, we did see them against Tech lose more 50-50 balls than we had seen them lose all year long. And that can't happen. That can't be a thing, So there's a little bit or a lot to kind of go around. But at the end of the day, when we get back to the genesis about what the question really is getting the job done? Well, if you rank ninth in total defense and 75th in the country, the answer is pretty simple. No, not getting the job done. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you fire a guy in season? I'm not in favor of that. Okay, I'm just not in favor of that. I think that to do that, I think it's a panic move. I don't know if you fire a guy after a 3-point loss. Like, it's and I don't know. You could talk about the collective, but a couple of weeks ago we weren't talking about how PK needs to get fired after Alabama. So after one game, for us to then have the conversation about how he needs to lose his job seems like just a little bit. Now, you got to let the season play out. I think you got to let the season play out. I think you got to let this thing go the way it's going. I don't know if you want to, especially from a recruiting standpoint, show everyone that there's a lot of weaknesses. Now, I know you could say from flip side is you want to be able to show these recruits, right, I'm going to get this defense done. But the challenge is, if you make a move like this, unless you have someone ready to go right away, the conversations become, well, who's going to be your DC going forward? Who's going to be the guy that's leading you going forward? And so when you get recruited against, you have the possibility of losing recruits, because everyone's going to say, well, I don't know what my DC is going to be. And then, but here's the thing. If you fire the defensive coordinator, the new defensive coordinator that comes in, that person is going to want to bring some of his people. That's just how it goes. That person will want to come in and bring some of his people. He may want to bring in his own DB coach, own safety coach, own linebacker coach, defensive line coach. He's going to say, I want to bring a couple of my guys. So then everybody else is in that class, again, 2023 class. Then the question is, not only is who's your DC, are you sure that your position coach is going to be there? Because if you listen, that Pete K is gone. Now, if you get what you can say to yourself is, well, if you just elevate Gary Patterson and put him in that place, then all things are solved. And that in itself, if that's a simple solution, then look, there could be a real simple solution as relates to that as concerned. But I'm not quite sure you want to do that at this moment. I think you got to let this thing play out a little bit longer and see if there can be some changes made, if everyone can get on the same page. Because again, what did I say? Was it just one person? There's supposed to be, an analyst that's helping. There's a defensive staff that's there as well, right? And then there's Steve Sarkisian, who, look, if you're going to start pointing fingers, you can't absolve him. You can't absolve him because, one, that's the guy he hired, right? So you can't just look like, well, man, what could you have done? Well, you couldn't have brought him in the first place, but you hired him, so you have to ride with him. Like, that's only fair. And look, if he says I'm more involved in this, then also the question, as relates, even as we talked about PK, then also the second question becomes, okay, well, Coach Sarkisian, you said you're going to be more involved. So what are you doing in addition to making this thing better? Because at the end of the day, the buck will always stop with the head coach. I mean, think about it. Think about Charlie. Every guy that he hired was on his original staff, with the exception of Brian Jean Marie, had somewhat lost their job or gotten demoted. Vance Bedford was there at the end, but Vance Bedford had, got pushed down at the end of the day. And what did we say? Well, I mean, you at the end of the day, you blame Charlie for that because those are your guys. You brought them in. Tom Herman only took about a couple of years. And then he just threw a hand grenade to his coaching staff, right? He got got rid of like 7 guys. He was just like, I'm starting from scratch. And everyone's like, oh, okay, so it's not Todd Orlando anymore. It's Chris Ash. By the way, I guess we get a little worried if I'm Pete K, if Steve Sarkisian brings in someone who's just going to kind of do some sort of evaluation. You remember that when that happened? And that didn't really end up well, even though the narrative at that time was, nah, Chris Ash is just here to help out and lend a helping hand. He's not really here to be the DC. Like, nah, what are you guys talking about? And it's like a few months later, he's a defense coordinator. You're like, oh, that's what we were talking about. That's what it was. But yeah, as relates to, what do you do, within that situation? What do you do as far as getting, the DC and involved, the recruiting, all that kind of stuff? It's mid-season, like it's September. Is it someone a panic move? You probably want to wait until Texas OU before you get past that, before you even start thinking about those kind of things. And again, but you still got to keep the recruiting class together. And then you don't want to lose the guys on the team, because then there's that factor, right? All of a sudden, man, now he's firing guys, getting rid of guys. Like, what the hell's going on? This is Texas, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think the dominoes fall, kind of hard for a season that you tell yourself, man, maybe you just fix this defense and get this defense right and fix the little things. Yeah, it would be, you've still got a chance to have some good stuff that's going to occur. And here's the other thing too. If we're going to just be 100% fair, especially as it was talking about the Tech game, we can't ignore that the offense struggled, especially in the second half of that Tech game. Let me go through this thing here, and let me find it real quick. And again, a lot of good radio here. Hold on, let me just grab. Here we go. Okay, second half drives for Texas. Okay, let's look at it. One play was on downs. 4 plays, 8 yards. There was a TD. That was 8 plays, 59 yards. Next drive, third drive, was a punt. 3 plays, 2 yards. Another punt, 3 plays, -1 yard. Another punt, 5 plays, 17 yards. Then the field goal, 5 plays, 46 yards. So we're talking about an offense that in the second half didn't do anything. So if your offense is not doing anything, then of course your defense is going to be on the field. And of course, the longer you keep your defense out on the field, the more prone something bad is going to happen. And we saw that the longer they stayed out there, something bad happened. And Joey McGuire went on it. It was like Joey McGuire was playing Madden or something like that. In Madden, you just never punt. For those who play, I haven't played in years, but that's kind of how it was. That Joey McGuire just went straight Madden. It's like, I'm just going to punt. I'm never going to punt this ball or kick a field goal or anything to that effect until he had to actually kick one to win it. And I say never. I mean, I know there was a couple here and there, but you get what I mean as far as the 4th down conversions are concerned. And so for me, this is what I would do. If I was Sarkisian, I say, all right, listen, we got to find a way to turn this thing around. We were close against Alabama. We still had a chance to win the Texas Tech game. Don't panic, and see what you can figure out ASAP. ASAP to make sure this thing gets back on course, to get the win versus West Virginia, to get the win versus OU. You get those 2 wins. The defense is somewhere. The defense goes somewhere between Alabama and Texas Tech. If they're somewhere right here in the middle, that should be good enough to win most games. That are left on the schedule. That should be good enough. But they've got to be able to figure that out, because at the end of the day, if he does not figure that out, then he's going to have to figure out what kind of moves he's going to have to make in the offseason, because you can't go and sit in Chris Del Conte's office with another subpar season, another subpar defense, and say, we're going to bring the band all back together. That's not going to happen. After every season, the coach has to sit down with the athletic director, and they've got to go through and say, okay, what happened bad in the season, and what are you going to do to change it? And the thing he can't do, especially when you're paying him that much money, the highest paid assistant on staff, no. They're going to want a little return on that investment. And so at that point, a change would have to be made. So that's why it's important for everyone to figure it out now, figure out why there's plenty of season left, because the numbers are not good and the numbers are not trending in the right direction. And then ultimately, if the stats, these numbers affect the numbers that really matter, which is wins and losses, then it's going to be bad for everyone involved. So if you're a Texas fan, keep your fingers crossed that Pete K figures it out. Garrett Patterson has some input. Steve Sarkisian is able to do it. And by the way, and that players are able to execute when their name and numbers are called upon. That's what your ultimate hope is going to be. Back to the original question, is he getting the job done? No. Does he have plenty of opportunity to prove himself and try to get the job done? The answer is yes, and we'll figure out what happens. And until next time, thank you for watching the Texas Longhorn Football Channel. It's your main man, Anwar Richardson. Hit like and subscribe. If you lasted this long, let me know what you think. Put your comments in the chat. I'm going to be reading those throughout this week. Thank you. Please continue to support everything else that's on this channel. Really appreciate talking to you, hearing from you. And I look forward to speak to you. Drunk Uncle every Wednesday night, by the way. Such shameless plug for me. And, of course, all the other great content that's here on the channel. But until we talk, I'll talk to you guys next time. Be safe. Talk to you soon. See ya.